And welcome into our Zoom interviews. I'm Stan the Fan of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. With me is Ross Grimsley, former left-handed pitcher in the big leagues and most notably with the Baltimore Orioles. And joining us on our Zoom interview this week, which will be seen on PressBoxOnline.com, is our special guest, somebody I've gotten pretty friendly with over the past year and a half or so, and that is former big league trainer, and he is still, I want to get it right, still senior medical advisor to the St. Louis Cardinals. He's also the author of this book. We'll talk a little bit about it, Eating My Way Through Baseball, and he is Barry Weinberg. Barry, thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to be here. It's great to see people. You stick in your house for so long. It's really nice to see two faces. It's kind of
really nice. Yeah. Hey, before we start talking about the couple topics we want to talk about, which is the pandemic and its effect on baseball, and we want to talk about your book, you happen to have a connection to one of the Orioles draft picks. Their fourth pick in the draft is an infielder from Florida. He's playing for Ole Miss, but he's from Florida, Anthony Servideo.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your connection with him. And Ross, did you know he's Kurt Bleffery's grandson?
Yes, I saw that.
All right.
That's such a neat story.
Yes.
He was your third round pick. Anthony Servideo played at Ole Miss, played at Jupiter High here, a real good baseball down here in Jupiter. And his dad is general manager of the golf course that I belong to. And so I've known the kid. In fact, I can't tell anybody, but I snuck him into our batting cage many times. When he was younger, and now he doesn't have to sneak anywhere. He's a professional player. Yeah. But it's wonderful. He got drafted. He's a great kid. He plays several positions, but he's a very talented young man and a wonderful kid. And I just wish him all the luck. I think it's a great spot for him to be. And his connection as being a grandson of a former Oriole who was very popular in Baltimore is great. I'll embarrass his mom if she ever watches this, but I know she cried because it's her dad.
Yep. Well, Kurt was an Oriole for about 4 or 5 years before being traded to the Houston Astros, and his career didn't really take off quite as good as we thought it would, but he's certainly a certifiable major league player. Hey, Barry, before we talk about your book, one of the reasons I've been sort of holding you in abeyance was I thought the timing would be perfect to get you on just as baseball was about to resume. And it's taken forever. And I don't want to talk to you about the labor situation, but Ross and I are both talking about this between ourselves, how complicated this is from a medical standpoint. Also, the fact that players are coming back to do a second spring training, keeping our fingers crossed that they will get there in the next 10 days or so. Your thoughts on the complications involved with coming back from this pandemic?
Well, and probably Ross was involved in 94, 95. We had a strike shortened year, and it's a little different because we could utilize all the facilities, and I think we had a 19-day spring training, I think.
Yep. I remember it's something like that.
So you can do it. You can get ready in that time, and I think they'll expand the roster. So that's not but like you said, the logistics is very difficult, and also it's very unlike the last work stoppage, if you want to call it, where you had total use of your facilities. Well, there are very limited uses of the facilities coming back now. If you're going to use your home ballpark and you're going to have 45, 50 players, how are you going to get them all batting practice and how are you going to get game type situations with you know what I mean? And all the infield work you need with all these players having one field, where in Florida and at our spring training sites, you always have the capabilities of using 5, 6 fields if you need to. So that's one of the things. I think what happens is that I think every time you answer, you solve a problem, more questions come up.
There's another one, yeah. It's amazing because PFP is not going to exist. You can't have groups of guys doing stuff. That's going to really, unless they're all in bubbles. But the logistics are just so unbelievable. And like you said, you solve one problem, another one comes up. What are you going to do there? But,
I also, Russ, and you know that you've been to some of the smaller ballparks, right?
yeah,
That have a single cage.
right.
You know, how do you fit all the? You know, it's going to be a 12 or 14-hour workday. You know.
You brought up the point about how many players each team's going to have because there's not going to be minor league baseball. You're going to have about a 30-man or maybe even 40-man taxi squad of players that are staying in shape and playing ball.
Yeah.
Is it possible that you would have the guys that they're pretty sure are going to make the major league team train up here in Baltimore, and the players that are going to be taxi squad guys will train somewhere else to make the logistics a little easier?
That's an answer for a guy with a higher pay grade than myself. But no, I think it's a good point. Where do you put all these people? And also, you know, it's kind of like hockey has this, healthy scratches. You know,
Yep.
so you have to have a certain amount of players available each day, and then you're going to have certain players available in case, like you said, you have an injury that night and you're going to have to replace them, or, you know, things like that. So, you know, all those logistics, I'm sure, have been worked out. That's the, you know, I think that, you know, all those things are, I don't want to say easy, but those are those things can be worked. The numbers can work.
Yeah, well, what do they do? Somebody like down in Florida, they've come up with 40 guys around the leagues have come up with the virus. They start the season and a team gets 3 or 4 guys with a virus. What do? They shut that team down, or?
It depends which the guys are. If they're starters, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, but that's a great point. And what if 3 guys come down and it's your top 3 pitchers, or what if 4 guys come down and it's your starting infield? You can't. Again, it creates more questions, and you have to be prepared for that. So that's why I think they have to have enough, preparation, and they have to have answers before these questions come up. That what do you do if? And that's probably going to be one of the most used phrases is, what do we do if?
Barry, if you were the trainer of the Baltimore Orioles, let's just hypothetically, are a lot of these decisions going to be made by the head trainer and the clubhouse guy with the general manager's input? How are the decisions going to be made?
Well, I think you've got a group involved. You've got medical people involved. You've got baseball people involved. You've got administrative people involved, and then you've got the Major League Baseball people who I'm sure have protocols from the CDC or whoever's the governing body going to mandate what they need to do. So I think you've got a real group effort that's going to, I don't think one guy is going to have that responsibility. It's going to be a real group effort, I believe. This isn't something you've done before,
Yep.
So it's new to everybody, and everyone's got to say, well, in the past we did, well, we haven't had a pass to this, so we don't have how to do this. And you have to just try to make the most logical and educated decision through a group process.
What's interesting, the NBA, they seem to have their act closer together than any of the other sports for a good while. They came out about 3-4 weeks ago. You knew that they were going to start at the end of July. They were going to play in the bubble down there in Orlando, keep all the 22 teams that are still going to be competing. They were all going to be in Orlando. And now all of a sudden, Florida is spiking up a little bit. Were they too far out in front making their plans for their sport?
Listen, I don't think anyone can predict where this virus is going to go and how it's going to go, and if we're going to decrease, and if North Carolina is going to have the least amount, or all of a sudden Florida has a large amount and New York may not. I don't know. And whoever can predict where it goes, can you give me the lottery numbers?
Really.
You're that good at predicting which way this is going.
Ross, go ahead.
Let's go on to the book. I want to hear some of these stories. Now, I haven't read the book, but I did some research. Now, I know you were.
And I'm holding up the book.
Yeah,
eating
you were
my way through
Silver
baseball.
Spring in Maryland, and I know you're a big Washington Senator fan.
Yeah.
Tell the story about Frank Howard moving in across the street from you.
Yeah, well, it was a big thrill. This is in the late '60s, and when Frank Howard joined the Washington Senators, and Frank Howard was the biggest star Washington in that era ever had, and so he moved right around the corner and right across the street, and I had I guess the guts, as a 16-year-old, to knock on the door and ask if I could babysit for his four kids. So they said yeah, and he found out what a great baseball fan I was, and he would call up and say, "Mrs. Weinberg, is Barry available? We're having a wiffle ball game out in the street. Can he play?"
Oh,
And I'm thinking, here's Frank Howard calling you if you want to play wiffle ball with him. So he was spectacular, and the personality. I'm sure you probably got to meet him.
Yes.
He's got a wonderful personality. He's just one of the kindest, most gentle. He's a gentleman in both words, one word and two words, gentleman and gentleman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our friend.
He's probably one of the greatest influences I had in my young career. And still today I speak to him occasionally. Last year I had the opportunity to go by and have lunch with him, and he's still one of my biggest influences, mentors, and really most respected baseball guy. There's Frank Howard stories everywhere. He's terrific, but he used to bring me to the ballpark,
Right.
I watched the game, or I watched batting practice and from the dugout, and then he'd bring me a ticket, said, "Here you go, sit in the seat," and I'd know where to meet him after the game, and I'd meet him after the game, and I'd drive him home.
That's a great story.
He would sit back, and I got to drive him home in his car. I'm thinking, it's Barry Weinberg, Edith and Harold's son from Silver Spring. I get to drive Frank Howard home, right?
Now,
My mom said, and I come home, my knuckles would be blue because it was so cold. You know how hot it gets in DC, right?
Yeah.
And it was hot and humid, and Frank would have that air conditioning of I want to say it was a Chevy Impala. I'm not exactly, but he'd have that air conditioning turned up, and I was freezing. My mom said, why didn't you tell Frank to turn the AC down? I said, "Mom, I can't tell Hondo to turn the AC down."
Yeah, right.
I'm 17 years old. I was thrilled to drive.
Now we're pretty good friends with Boog Powell.
Yeah.
And Boog was a little bit of a drinker. He liked to have a little libation. He says he can handle his alcohol pretty good. He says, but nowhere like Frank. He says Frank Howard is by far and away able to handle the heaviest drinking he's ever seen. Not even close. Yeah. Hey, I saw you talk at one of the synagogues in town that Adam Gladstone invited you to. And you told the story about you were assistant trainer to the New York Yankees in the late 70s. And you were there when Thurman Munson was there.
Yeah, he was my first year in the major leagues was 1979. And at spring training, the guys would come up and introduce themselves. And one of the biggest thrills I had, my first day, the first couple minutes, when I got to the locker room, like at 6 a.m, Catfish Hunter was already there. And he was hanging clothes. He was helping the clubhouse guy hang clothes. I'm thinking, that's Catfish Hunter. He's helping the clubhouse guy because he got there so early, because he's a North Carolina farm guy. And he up at the crack of dawn, the crow. And he helped. And so anyways, he came over and introduced himself, says, "Barry, I'm Catfish Hunter." And I wanted to say, "Yeah, I know that," but he knew my name, and that was such a thrill. I'm just 27 years old. I've only spent 5 years in the minor leagues, and you get to go to the New York Yankees, who at the time were world champs. After it was 79, so they were 78 world champs. But anyways, Thurman came in, introduced himself, and said, "I'm Thurman Munson." And again, I wanted to say, "Yeah, I think so. I know that." But I said, "I'm Barry Weinberg." He says, "Nice to meet you." Well, about halfway through practice, he comes back and says, "Hey, I got a blister, Goldberg. I need a Band-Aid." I said, "It's Weinberg." He goes, "Okay, Goldberg." He called me Goldberg every day. I never called me Weinberg. It was always Goldberg. And I never, and then he'd make fun of me, from being from Maryland, for anything, being a rookie. He'd make terrible fun of me. And I thought, God, this guy hates me. But at the end of the day, he'd come up and see if I was okay. And he, he'd give me a couple bucks and says, here, he says, take yourself to dinner or something. So but then the next day he'd be back, teasing me like crazy.
Now, 79, that was your first season with the Yankees.
Yeah.
That's also tragically the year that he passed away.
Yeah.
And you have an interesting story about that.
Yeah, he and I got real close, because I take care of him. He'd always tease me about, about working on him, but he'd always come back and I'd get up to, to work on, tape his ankle or rub his back or whatever it was. And he said, I know you were in Columbus, Ohio last year. He said, and I live in Canton. He says, on an off day, he says, if I fly home, he flew his own plane. He says, why don't I fly you down to, back to Columbus? So I did. I got permission. I flew with him, and he would drop me off, and I'd meet him back in Canton, and then fly back to New York after spending an off day. Well, we were in Chicago on August 1st, and he says, Barry, he says, I'm going home tonight. He says, do you want to fly down to Columbus? I'll take you back down, to Columbus, where I was, trainer the year before. I said, no, Thurman, I can't go. My sister's getting married on over the weekend. I have to go home and back to New York and do some things I promised to do and stop in the ballpark. So I really wish I could do it maybe next time. And the next day he was killed.
Unbelievable.
So I wouldn't have been on the plane, but I wouldn't have had a ride home,
Yeah.
But that was the first time you experience something like that's not supposed to happen, and someone you looked up to and
Right.
someone everyone looked up to and admired, and what an influence and what a dynamic figure, and to lose something like that, and to see a team, the next day cry. We played the Orioles, in fact. We
Yep.
played the Orioles.
Yeah.
And,
I was up in Montreal when that happened. I was a free agent and went from Baltimore to Montreal, and that happened. I know playing against him was, he was a battler, and you just really admired him. But it was a shock to everybody, a shock to us. I know I was at Gary Carter's house. We were at a party and found out, and I just sat on the floor and cried. It was, I knew him as an opponent talking to him and stuff, but still, it was what a shock that was.
there's some opponents you can agree that even if you don't know him, there's a respect that you have for him, and you say, God, he'd be a neat guy to be on a team with. And so for us, I got to be on a team with, even for that short period of time I did.
Very special, yeah.
Pretty neat. It was pretty lucky, and to this day, August 2nd is a hard day for me. Like today, and today is I bring it up, but today, Darryl Kyle died 18 years ago today, and
Wow.
I was there for that. That was devastating. When you go up in a plane, there's an inherent danger, that something may happen. But when you're a 33-year-old and go to bed at night, there should be no danger that you're not going to wake up.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that was a really a crushing day that I had to receive the call on the field from the security people that he had passed away, and I had to go to the hotel and identify the body, with Walt Jocketty, our GM. That was a horrific day. So
Yes.
I imagine it would be.
Unbelievable.
yeah.
Barry, you leave the Yankees, and you end up, because you were pretty friendly with a guy named Billy Martin, they bring you out to Oakland to be his head trainer with the Oakland A's in 1982.
Right.
And little did you know that you would spend a large portion of the next 25 years with the guy who succeeded him. There was probably a manager or two in between. But tell us a little bit about Billy Martin, but then we want to hear about Tony La Russa.
Yeah, well, Billy is very loyal, and the first call I made to Oakland was to Mickey Morabito to tell Billy that I was available and lost my job in New York after the '81 World Series, and so Billy was there, and to make a long story short, 3 weeks later, I was a head trainer for the Oakland A's, and so I owe a lot to Billy, his loyalty, and he was a dynamic figure. I tell you what, and Tony and all these guys that have said they didn't like managing against him just because, from when the game started to when the game ended, no one was better than Billy. But from when the game ended to when the game started the next day, there was
some issues there. Once in a while.
Anything goes.
Anything goes. But he was, you talk about a dynamic figure to be around and to listen to him in the dugout, and then just his perception of the game and how his foresight and Tony always has a quote that in order to be real successful in baseball, you have to learn to slow the game down. Now, the game's very quick and it gets on you real fast. And it's hard to be reactive. It's much easier to be proactive and, get to a situation and deal with it. Well, Billy, boy, he had just such insight to what was going to go on, and they were similar in that respect. And I know they respected each other, a lot. And, and then, there was a couple managers in between, Steve Boris and
Jackie Moore.
Got managed Oakland, and then Tony came out and spent 10 years there, and I spent 10 years with him, and those were interesting years. He, everyone said, "God, you got along great with Tony." Well, I tell a funny story that Tony, my first year, sat me down and said, "Barry," he says, "I've heard great things about you. I've watched you. You have a great knack in the training room. You're very talented. And the doctors say you're unbelievable talent, but there's two things." He says, "You like women and golf too much. You got to stop talking about your women and playing golf." And I said, "Oh boy." So about a couple months later, he calls me in his office. He says, "Barry," he says, "You're the most boring man I've ever met." He says, "Would you go out and get a date and play golf one day?" Because he says, "You've become a total boring man." But that was the first, and then 14 years in St. Louis. So 24 years on the bench with Tony was, and his staff and the way they worked together and for one common goal. And he gave such autonomy to people, and everyone had a responsibility to do their job. And, he led through expression. He let them express themselves. And the great part about it, though, he always had a line. He said, "Just remember," he says, "I have the office, you have the locker." So when the decisions come down, it's his decision. But he made a lot of right ones. So,
right. He was good about, you guys go out to dinner, and I read this. You would go out to dinner, and he would be with there'd be somebody joining you, of some big name guy, and he would be kind of talking to him and writing some stuff down and learning. It seemed like he learned from everybody who was around. He learned something.
He would keep a pen and he would write notes. We've had, dinner with Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells and Ron Wolf and Bobby Knight. Yeah. And, name it, John Grisham and people in football back, John Havlicek and, from all walks of life. And so he would keep notes and people would say something and he would write it down, and sometimes he didn't have paper, he'd write it on the tablecloth,
Yeah.
A napkin or get paper, but that's how, you constantly learn. And I tell kids now when I talk to the minor leaguers, I said, it comes from that. I said, learn to write things down. At the end of your day, take a minute or two to write something down, something you learned. If you met someone important, if you met a Hall of Famer, if someone said something to you, if you learned a quote, if you learned something on the field, take a few minutes to write it down, because at the end, you're going to have an amazing journal. And your journey is going to be made up of all these little stories and all these little, whether it's a quote or experience that you're going to gain. And I wish I had written all of them down, and I tried to remember a lot in the book, but, one of the stories I tell is with Jack Buck. I used to give Jack Buck a insulin shot every day for the last 4 years of his life. And he'd tell me a story or a joke every day. And I said, "Barry, you dummy." He says, "That's the book I should have written."
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I would have called it a shot of Jack. You know,
Yeah.
giving Jack a shot. And you tell me a story every day.
A
You know,
shot of Jack.
yeah, and that was a book I should have written. You know,
Hey, I
but,
want to
you know,
ask you. I want to ask you about somebody because we focused on Martin and then LaRussa. One of the most intriguing guys that worked under Tony was Dave Duncan.
yeah,
Because Dave Duncan, there aren't many catchers that become pitching coaches. And not only did he become a pitching coach, I think we might all agree, the three of us, one of the preeminent pitching coaches over the last 50 years or so. What made him so special?
well, Dunk had such a feel for the game, you know, and I think as a catcher, the catcher is the only one that faces the field and understands the whole aspect of the game like that, you know, like he did. And then he, you know, he understood pitching. He got to learn that, and he understood people. And I think that's the most important thing. He learned to deal with people. And Dunk was not, I don't want to use the word outgoing, but he wasn't the loudest or, you know, he was very quiet. In fact, there's two of my favorite and great coaches I've ever had were the two most quiet coaches that I've had. Hitting coach Charlie Lau and pitching coach Dave Duncan. But I tell you what, so when they spoke, you listened.
Right.
You know, but the guys would come up to Charlie or Dave and say, "What do you think?" And Dave would go, "Looks good." You know, like you don't need feedback every time, every day, because you're doing fine. You know, as a pitcher, you know, if there's a 0 at the end of your inning, guess what? You did fine.
You did something right.
Yeah, you know, hey, what did I do? Well, whatever you did, try to repeat it, you know, because you got a 0. But, you know,
So simple,
so
but
didn't make it too complicated. And Dunk didn't complicate things. And he made it so simple and he simplified things, but he knew people and he could talk to people and talk to guys on different levels. And could reach each guy at that person's level, you know, and get the same point across in a different manner to different guys. And that's really a special trait that he had, really special.
He came over to Baltimore in '75, I believe. And
From Cleveland.
75 or 70, I forget when it was, but he caught us. And he wasn't real out, like you said, he didn't speak a lot, but when he's talked to you, and then I went to Cleveland, and he was the pitching coach in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And that was something pretty special that, you know, my coach was the catcher, and then I had Vern Rapp, who was the catcher at Cincinnati. And these guys had a way of getting, and they learned pitching mechanics and what have you, that they knew that type of stuff. And it wasn't they didn't give you an overdose of stuff. They just made it
Well, you know, you brought up a good thing. You said, you know, a lot of these guys, you can learn the mechanics, okay? And we can read books and understand the proper mechanics and things like that. And that's the science of pitching, okay? But being a good coach is an art form.
Right.
You know, and these guys that are great, they've made it an art form, and they understand the bedside manner that you need and how to approach people and how to get your point across, you know, and how to, you know, and that's the real art of coaching and managing is the art form. You know, it's easy to know when to bunt, hit and run, or you know, and when to, but guys, to get guys to perform at the level that they, you know, they're sometimes not capable of and exceed the level that they're capable of is real special, and it brings out great coaches like Charlie and Dave.
Well, who else could do it other than a catcher?
Exactly.
You know, that's pretty much.
Hey, the three of us all love the game of baseball, and we've seen it in different settings. You in New York, Oakland, St. Louis, Ross in Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Montreal. What makes St. Louis such a special baseball town? You were able to spend a nice 13-year run there.
You know, the people are so knowledgeable about the game. They appreciate the game. They love the game. And I think what happened is that when I got there, I understood that KMOX was the radio channel.
Yeah.
It went to like 32 states, something like that, before television came in. Well, your grandfather loved baseball, and he loved it through the radio.
And he listened to it in Arkansas or Florida, and he heard those games.
Missouri and Illinois and Iowa and Alabama and Missouri, you know, and Nebraska and all those. And your grandfather listen to it, so you listen to it, okay? Because before TV, and also St. Louis was the farthest team west in baseball
Until the Dodgers and Giants moved. Yep.
moved out. In fact, the one team moved to Baltimore.
Yep, that's right.
Moved to Baltimore, but I think so. You were born into St. Louis baseball, and I made the mistake my first week. I was at a restaurant and someone said, "What are you doing in town?" I said, "Well, I'm the new athletic trainer with the St. Louis Cardinals." I said, "Are you a Cardinal fan?" You like I had three noses or something. Of course.
Like, who else would I?
I came from Oakland, and you could be an A's fan, you could be a Giant fan, or you could be no fan, in the Bay Area, But yes, we're Cardinal fans. I mean, everyone's a Cardinal fan, and you grow up being Cardinal, and you stay a Cardinal fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Ross.
People go to Chicago and they're still Cardinal fans because they grew up.
I know Ross had a question about 3 very special players that played for the Cardinals.
Oh, yeah. I'm being raised in Memphis, Tennessee, St. Louis, we had the Cardinals, and I would listen on the radio late at night to the games. My dad, who played for 16 years, he was, I think he was with the Cardinals briefly. I'm not sure in their minor league system. But anyway, I got to go to the, I think the 68 World Series when Gibson struck out all those guys. I sat in right field and saw that. That was amazing. But I actually got to pitch against Gibson and hit against him, which was another thing. And toward the end of his career, thank goodness. But Lou Brock, I was, friends with him when he was there. And those were 3 guys, Musial. I saw him play, but I never played against him. Lou Brock and Bob Gibson. Those are 3 guys, Cardinals, that you really.
I'll tell you what, it's great because when I came 98, Brock, Gibson, Shane Dietz, and Musial were still very active.
Very active.
And you could not have gotten 4 finer people, we can tell stories for hours on Red and Stan. I would have loved to have been on the train with Red and Stan.
Yeah.
God, that would have been unbelievable, a train trip with those guys,
And Harry Carey back then.
Yeah, but Lou is a classy man.
Yes.
Gibby, I love Gibby. He's great.
Yeah.
I was in the training room one day and Gibby's talking to the guys and someone said, "Mr. Gibson," says, "Can I ask you a question?" And Gibby says, "Yeah." He says, "What was it like facing Mays, Aaron, Clemente?" And Gibby just looked at him and said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask them what was it like facing Bob?"
Yeah.
So
I love that.
But he did it in style. He's a great guy, and Red was just such a beautiful man. Stan was the best. Stan was, he came in and we'd go to dinner with Stan and one night we're at dinner and I'm having dinner I think it was McGuire and Stan came over to the table and says hello, and then as he's going back to his table, he passes a table in the middle of the room and a lady was having a birthday. Okay, well Stan, if you know, plays a harmonica. Okay, takes his harmonica everywhere with him. Says to everybody in the restaurant, "Hey everybody, it's Susie's birthday. Let's sing happy birthday." Pulls out his harmonica and plays happy birthday to this lady. I'm thinking, here's a lady that's going to go home and said, "How was your birthday?"
Stan Musial.
Believe it, but Stan, that's the kind of guy. He was just he was such a wonderful man. He told me, we were going to New York and Boston on a trip in one of the interleague plays, and Stan said, "Barry," I said, "I used to love going to New York and Boston." So really? So yeah. He says, "Well, New York, we'd stay six or 7 days because we played both teams. And then I'd love going to Boston." I said, "Why?" "Well, for 3 reasons." He says, "First of all, they had lobsters and I love lobster, Boston, and it was a little cooler than New York, He says, "Because it's on the water, I said, "And what was the 3rd reason?" He said, "Well, Boston had lousy pitching." I mean, he was just such a delight to be around, such a classy man. Those 4 guys were just unbelievable, and unfortunately 2 of them are gone. But those memories, and you're right. You couldn't have, you can't pick 4 greater Hall of Fame people besides 4 greater Hall of Fame players.
Right. Well, you think of St. Louis, you think of class, and those guys that are classy. And I was very fortunate to get to play against a couple of them, which was really neat.
Hey, the book is is Eating My Way Through Baseball. It's written by Barry Weinberg. Where can people get this book? And then I got one last question for you.
Okay, it's on eatingmywaythroughbaseball.com.
Okay.
My website, or you can go on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and buy it online there. So yeah, it's, I tell you what, I have a friend of mine who's a writer who said to me, Barry, you got to write something. We have the dinner just like we're doing now.
Right.
We're sitting around, we're telling stories, and some of these should be preserved, and some people should know about this, so your kids can understand the history of the game, and their kids, and I think it's important. And said, you got to write these down. And I said, yeah, what am I going to do, right? I can't write. I'm a trainer. Each year I'd have lunch or dinner with him, and he said, have you written them down yet? I said, no. He said, here's a number. Call this lady, Angela Shelton. She says, she's a writer. She said, I've told her about you. She will transcribe all these stories, and that's how the genesis.
That's how it got done. Hey, I got to ask you, in the foreword of the book, or before the foreword, which was written by Joe Buck, there's quotes from a lot of people here. I want to ask you about one, and it's Barkley, Namath, Bob Costas, George Will, Walt Jocketty, but Sandy Koufax.
Yeah.
Now, you're a Jewish guy from Silver Spring, Maryland. Yeah. Is that what led you to Sandy? How did you meet Sandy?
Billy Andrade is a good friend of mine. He's a professional golfer. And Billy and Sandy were very close. And one night, and Billy stays with me down here in Florida when he comes plays in some of the tournaments years ago. So this was several years ago, a long time ago now. And he said, Barry, he says, I'm going out, we're going out to dinner tonight. He says, I got a special guest. I said, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, gosh, now he and Joe Pesci were friends. I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's Joe Pesci. He played at Wake Forest, and maybe Arnold Palmer's in town, I'm thinking, and I guess, no, I said, it's better than that. So I said, don't tell us. So I walk in the restaurant. As soon as I walk in the restaurant, there's Sandy Koufax sitting at the table.
Gosh. I
said, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I get choked up. That speech he's such a wonderful man. Such a, he's just warm and individual, and he's very open, and, when he speaks, and a sharp guy, and man, just a delight to be around. He and I have been friendly, and he's been great.
He's a legend. He's a legend. It's unbelievable.
It's funny. He comes up and sees some of the golf tournaments that Billy's played, and I've been to a golf tournament, Billy, and he wears his ball cap, and we're walking around. Not one person said hello. Don't recognize him.
Yep.
And it's kind of neat, what I mean.
Yeah.
But he's a terrific man, and what a thrill for myself, and not only just being I've been the trainer for Team Israel.
That's how you got to know Adam. Yeah. Adam Gladstone.
Yep. For the last couple of WBCs, and so he, in fact, he signed a jersey for the Olympic team to raise money.
That's great. That's great.
He's been great. So that's
Barry, many thanks.
Someone said that man, they said, well, you get old, you meet a lot of people, but I've been very fortunate that my mom always said that the only thing you have is your reputation as you're growing up, and remember your name, as you grow up. It was instilled upon me. And so, you try to do the right thing and represent them well. And someone said, geez, you ought to write a book on just your endorsements. Those guys are, but I've been very lucky to have that. I'm real thrilled about the book. I think everyone will enjoy it. And what happened, we broke it down, and there's restaurants at the end of every chapter. And at the end of the book is a quick reference guide. There's over 300 restaurants.
Wow.
Every about 7 or 8 to 10 restaurants in every city in baseball, every major league city, and Baltimore has some great ones.
Barry Weinberg, the book is Eating My Way Through Baseball. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yes,
and let's all keep our fingers crossed that they're going to play some baseball in the not too distant future. For Ross Grimsley, I'm Stan the Fan Charles from Pressbox and PressBoxOnline.com, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, man.